Empathy for Palestinians cannot mean sympathy for Hamas. A conversation I had last week with a progressive Jewish friend is, I think, representative of many discussions happening on the left. Most liberals are horrified and outraged over Hamas killings and kidnappings in southern Israel but also strongly support a Palestinian state and are deeply critical of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. My friend anguished over parts of the left. Yes, they are very vocal online but a tiny minority of a broader movement, that not only failed to condemn Hamas atrocities but in some cases justified terrorist acts against innocents, many of them left-wing Israelis in kibbutzim who long for peace based on justice for Palestinians and Israelis alike. For my friend, this moral failure signaled that anti-Semitism had embedded itself in the wing of politics with which she has long identified. To comment on this intra-left controversy risks distorting the political stakes, since there is a rare consensus in mainstream politics that Hamas terrorism was an act of sheer evil, as President Biden said in his powerful speech on Tuesday. Little pockets of sympathy for Hamas will have no effect on U.S. politics going forward. The important contrast is between the moral and strategic seriousness of Biden's response and the petty, unhinged and self-involved rantings of Donald Trump. Maybe, just maybe, Americans pondering a vote for the former president will see more clearly that returning him to the White House would be an act of democratic suicide. But liberals and supporters of the Democratic left like to pride ourselves on being sensitive to injustice, decent in our instincts and capable of making distinctions. To rationalize the sadistic crimes of Hamas meets none of these standards. Doing so also undercuts the arguments that the vast majority on left wants to make about the future of Israel and Palestine. It's true that years of right-wing governance in Israel, the spread of settlements on the West Bank and the assault on democracy by the Netanyahu government have altered the balance of forces on the left. Older liberals such as Biden, and, yes, him in that camp, have an unshakable and ingrained sympathy for the survival of a Jewish homeland in Israel, while also empathizing with the injustices and suffering that Palestinians confront. We continue to support an increasingly distant two-state solution precisely because we want the Jewish homeland to be democratic and we want Palestinians to have a democratic government of their own. But the destruction of Israel would be a moral catastrophe, and Hamas longs for that outcome. Unlike the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Palestinian citizens of Israel, Hamas is explicitly anti-Semitic and will accept nothing short of the end of Israel. Netanyahu thought he could keep Hamas in check and ignore Palestinians, who, like so many of the Israelis slaughtered in the south, were willing to take risks for peace. The strategy of containing Hamas and privileging settlements on the West Bank has failed in an abysmal and tragic way. The sharp turn to the right in Israel that Netanyahu engineered has undercut support for the country among younger Americans in the United States. Most of these increasingly vocal critics have resisted supporting Hamas, but the gut liberal sympathy for Israel has largely disappeared among those born after Biden's generation and mine. If Hamas' shameful attack has mostly restored consensus in the Democratic Party around the need to defend Israel against mass terrorism, the underlying opposition to Israel's settlement policies and its refusal to engage with Palestinian demands for self-determination remains. The shock of these traumatic events should shake everyone into a reassessment rooted in moral realism. As my Post colleague Max Boot argued last week, the imperative of accountability should lead eventually to Netanyahu's ouster. Even as supporters of Israel stand up for its right to self-defense, analysts with long experience in the Middle East, including Thomas L. Friedman of the New York Times and the Post's David Ignatius, warn of the dangers of overreach in Gaza. Having reported alongside them and learned from them during the war in Lebanon in the 1980s, I share their skepticism of grand military plans that promise to settle a conflict for good. We have seen too many such promises fail in the Middle East. And Biden was right in his speech to call attention to moral obligations that apply even in legitimate wars of self-preservation. The left should not stop advocating on behalf of justice for Palestinians. And Israel's center and left should not stop demanding that Netanyahu's plans to undercut the country's judiciary be shelved permanently. But terrorism will not create a more democratic Israel or lead to self-determination for Palestinians. The Israeli-Palestinian dispute is rife with ambiguities and conflicting moral claims. This cannot be said of what Hamas did. Its actions are, exactly as Biden said, unambiguously evil. Empathy for Palestinians cannot mean sympathy for Hamas. A conversation I had last week with a progressive Jewish friend is, I think, representative of many discussions happening on the left. Most liberals are horrified and outraged over Hamas killings and kidnappings in southern Israel but also strongly support a Palestinian state and are deeply critical of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. My friend anguished over parts. No labels won't help Trump. Our polling shows that a unity ticket would pull from both parties equally. As no labels works to gain ballot access for a potential 2024 independent presidential ticket, most of the vitriol directed at us comes from the Democratic establishment, which is anxious that we'll hurt President Biden and help elect Donald Trump. But if these concerns were well-founded, I wouldn't be a part of this effort. No Labels has spent almost 2 years conducting extensive polling and modeling to understand our potential effect on the race and what our path to victory could be, including a poll late last year of more than 25,000 registered voters nationwide. It found that a moderate independent ticket would pull equally from both parties, 14% from registered Republicans, 14% from registered Democrats. This finding is backed by precedent. Ross Perot pulled equally from both parties in 1992. Of course, since No Labels would be nominating a unity ticket that could include a Republican and Democrat as running mates, much depends not only on who the candidates are, but the order in which they appear on the ticket. In July and August we tested how the partisan breakdown of the ticket would affect the race by surveying 10,000 registered voters in the top 8 presidential battleground states: Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. The poll, conducted by HarrisX, found that a unity ticket led by a Republican presidential candidate had a stronger path to victory and drew more votes from Mr. Trump than Mr. Biden in 7 states, with North Carolina the sole exception. Who will be on our ticket is still an open question, and we are currently determining the process by which that will be decided. But one thing is certain. We stand by our original pledge that we will nominate a ticket only if the American people want it and if the polling is clear that we won't be a spoiler. For now, both conditions are being met. Our polling shows that an independent ticket has a legitimate and expanding path to victory. In December, 58% of registered voters said they'd be open to voting for a moderate independent ticket if Messrs. Trump and Biden were the alternatives. By the summer that figure had grown to 63%, and some of the most significant growth occurred among a segment of voters who could be described as liking Mr. Trump's policies but not Mr. Trump. For any who are skeptical of No Labels internal polling, let's remember that poll after poll shows that 2/3 of Americans don't want a rematch of the 2020 election. A Gallup poll from October found that 63% of voters are open to a third party and that demand for